issues that matter to them before the final proposals form the 2026-27 budget. The pre-budget report is an important part of our commitment to transparency, collaboration, and sound financial management. In addition to the 2026-27 pre-budget report, the government will be releasing the 2025 annual report of the Fiscal Responsibility Panel. The panel's latest report provides a thorough assessment of our recent progress, including the introduction of corporate income tax, and outlines key recommendations to ensure long-term financial resilience. Upon re-entering office in 2017, this progressive Labor Party government made a commitment to return Bermuda to a position of fiscal strength by balancing our budget. I am proud to say that we have delivered on that promise. In the previous fiscal year, 2024-25, the government of Bermuda recorded a budget surplus of $29 million, the first budget surplus in over 20 years. For the first time in 2 decades, the consolidated fund took in more money than was spent. This is an overwhelmingly positive development for Bermuda. This view is strongly supported by the independent Fiscal Responsibility Panel. In their most recent report, the panel stated, and I quote, "Bermuda's fiscal position is now stronger than at any time in 2 decades," end quote. Perhaps the most important thing is the fact that we have delivered this surplus while staying true to our mission of fairness. We have delivered this surplus while reducing taxes for workers and families, raising pensions for our seniors, increasing scholarships for our students, investing in social services, and expanding childcare support for more Bermudian families. And it must be noted that this budget surplus was achieved before a single dime of corporate income tax was collected. It is important to note, no corporate income tax has been collected prior to the delivery of this surplus. But the positive news did not end in fiscal year 2024-25. As of the fiscal year, which is we're currently in, fiscal year 2025-26, we are expected to deliver a surplus again. Yes, this surplus will be somewhat due to CIT revenues, but it must be noted that non-CIT revenues are also higher than estimated, indicating broader improvement in the economy. The successful implementation of Bermuda's economic recovery plan, spearheaded by the Ministry of Economy and Labor, has led to better than expected economic performance in every single year since the pandemic. And over the past 4 years, this progressive Labor Party government has used this better than expected performance to cut taxes for workers and small business while reinvesting in key public services such as healthcare, education, public safety, and community organizations. Through the $21.8 million supplementary estimate recently passed in the House Assembly, we increased support to our hospital, increased scholarships, digital upgrades, youth services, affordable housing, rehabilitation, more police, stronger borders, and essential investments in government operations to make government more efficient and work better for you. We allocated $11 million to support salary agreements to the Bermuda Hospital Board staff, helping to retain and fairly compensate the professionals who care for our community. We also provided funding for residential treatment services, increased support for seniors and persons with disabilities, and expanded youth and mental health programs. To improve public safety, we funded the hiring of new police officers and the purchase of modern equipment for our borders. In education, we're increasing scholarships and upgrading technology in public schools. We are also investing in affordable housing projects and improving infrastructure, including roadways and parks. On Monday, ministers and MPs joined me as we awarded $1.5 million in capital development grants to community and sporting clubs to support critical upgrades to their infrastructure. This funding included $1 million allocated in the budget for this year, an additional $500,000 from the supplementary estimate to increase the support to our local clubs that they need and deserve. These targeted investments are only possible because of this government's fiscal discipline that we have maintained. They reflect this government's continued commitment to using the surplus funds responsibly, investing in services that matter to the people of Bermuda while staying focused on long-term sustainability and reducing our debt. The new revenues that we'll receive through the corporate income tax will be managed with the same fiscal prudence and long-term focus that has returned this country to a budget surplus. The government is proposing a clear, disciplined fiscal framework that ensures corporate income tax receipts will be used to implement the recommendations of the Tax Reform Commission that reduce debt, build financial reserves, and make strategic investments that serve the long-term interests of Bermuda and its people. Our forecasts show that net debt will fall from $3.2 billion today to below $2.5 billion by fiscal year 2027-28. That means less of your tax dollars going to interest payments and more being invested in things that matter, like healthcare and infrastructure. The proposed debt framework includes two new rules. First, a deficit rule. The current budget should remain in balance or surplus, excluding CIT revenues, capital spending, interest payments, and structural transformational investments, known as healthcare, because we must reform our healthcare system. Second, the debt over assets rule. Over a rolling period of 3 years, at least 70% of net CIT revenues should be devoted to paying debt interest, reducing net debt, or accumulating net financial assets. This approach is aligned with international best practice and continues the government's consistent approach to tax reform, where the Fiscal Responsibility Panel commented was, and I quote, swift, strategic, and executed with an impressive level of competence, end quote. They also commended the work of the new Corporate Income Tax Agency, saying that its development and operations have been, and I quote, very impressive and provide a sound foundation for a robust tax administration, end quote. With this solid foundation in place, we must now also continue to use CIT revenue wisely to ease the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Bermuda. That is the key point of this particular press conference, because the pre-budget report sets out what the government is seeking to do in the future. To this end, the government is considering a number of targeted policy proposals during this consultation period, recommended by the Tax Reform Commission and business stakeholders, and we are seeking feedback or alternatives from all residents and taxpayers. These proposals include the new proposed fiscal rules that I just covered to ensure long-term sustainability, including a balanced current budget and a 3-year debt over asset rule. Second, customs duty reductions, including expanding the list of essential items and revising vehicle duty thresholds to reduce the cost of purchasing a private vehicle. Proposed 10% reduction in vehicle license fees included in last year's budget, which will come into place in April 1st. Further reductions in payroll tax, including eliminating it for employers who retain workers over the age of 65. Increasing the local dividend tax exemption threshold from $10,000 to $25,000. Utility tax relief, including reducing or removing customs duties on electricity production even further. We've cut them by 80% already, and the view is to eliminate them entirely. And also considering a Tax Reform Commission recommendation of eliminating payroll tax on bulk generation contingent only on savings being passed on to consumers. Further payroll tax reductions for lower middle income workers making under $96,000 a year. The expansion of healthcare subsidies for seniors, low-income earners, and the underinsured, also recommendations of the Tax Reform Commission. As we prepare to deliver the budget for 2026-27 on February 20th, we would like to hear from you. The pre-budget report provides an opportunity for members of the public, local businesses, and other stakeholders to engage in the budget process. It's about sharing ideas on the kind of country we want to build together. So I encourage everyone to read the report, ask questions, and send feedback and suggestions either online at forum.gov.bm, which is our online forum where you can comment, share your ideas, vote, and comment on other person's ideas, or you can email openbudget@gov.bm before January 16th, 2026. Your input will help to shape the final budget. As we close out 2025, it is also appropriate that we look back on what has been achieved for the people of Bermuda this year following this government's re-election in February. In September, working with our union partners, the government completed long-needed public pension reform to the Public Service Superannuation Fund. That reform strengthened the long-term sustainability of the fund, protected retirement security of public officers, and delivered real savings for taxpayers. That same month, we also delivered an increase to the minimum wage, providing meaningful support to low-income workers at a time when cost of living pressures remain real. That decision reflects this government's continued commitment to fairness and ensuring that economic progress is shared. Also, during the budget, we reduced a significant number of taxes, which we will continue to do in the future. These actions have laid a strong foundation for an aggressive legislative agenda that we will continue to execute in 2026, starting with the budget. In addition to our legislative agenda, the government has continued to execute on our promises. Work is being advanced by the Ministry of Youth, Social Development, and Seniors on repurposing the former Gilbert Institute as a new seniors daycare facility, providing much needed support and relief for families. The Ministry of Home Affairs is also taking concrete action to help ease cost of living pressures. In October, the ministry launched the Affordable Basket Initiative, which provides targeted relief on essential grocery items and helps families manage everyday expenses. The Ministry of Housing and Municipalities has continued to advance the government's affordable housing agenda, with multiple Bermuda Housing Corporation projects progressing along the island at Battery Road, Harmony Terrace, Chelsea Apartments, and other sites. The Ministry of Public Works has continued to make steady progress on road improvements across the island, addressing a key frustration for motorists. The Ministry of Health has continued to advance healthcare reform, with phase 1 of universal health coverage scheduled to begin in January 2026. This will mean improvements and expansion to hip and future care, including free annual health exams, higher prescription limits, and the removal of the waiting period for personal home care benefits. The Ministry of Education has continued to advance the transformation of public education, including the reintroduction of the Gifted and Talented Education Program. The Ministry of National Security has continued to advance the National Violence Reduction Strategy, strengthening coordination across government departments and the community. This government came into office with a commitment to fiscal responsibility, economic fairness, and social progress. We have stayed focused, even when it was hard, even in the dark days of the pandemic, and even when the naysayers said that what we set out to achieve could not be done. And now this government is seeing the results. But the results are not for us. They are for the people of this country whose hard work and sacrifice means that they should enjoy the benefits of this economic progress. The work is not done. We understand that there is more needed to be done, but your input can help shape the future of what this next budget will look like as your government pledges to deliver more relief to you and your family and your small business. Thank you, and I'm now happy to take questions from members of the media.
Thank you, Premier, for your remarks this morning. We're going to start off with questions from the media. Do you want to go first, Jonathan?
Good morning, Jonathan. How are you today? It's been a while since I've had a press conference, actually.
I wanted to start with something that we reported on from the Chamber of Commerce. It's down the line, but obviously we're seeing that unemployment is very low, and that's very good news. Marito Thomas sounded the alarm particularly to do with the reopening of the Fairmont Southampton and the employment, I believe it's 70% for medians, basically saying that we're looking at an impending labor shortage that'll have a big knock-on effect across our economy. Just generally, if that fits in with the topic of the day, we were hoping to hear a bit on how we ward that off.
So Bermuda, like many other countries, is dealing with various demographic changes. If I just give rough numbers, these aren't exact numbers, So I'm just giving an example of what you would see insofar as the, I guess, proportion. Let's say about 1,000 Bermudians are turning 65 this year and getting to the place they leave the workforce. There's only about 500 Bermudians to replace those persons inside the workforce. You understand? That's just the reality. And so these are the things that compound our pressure on housing and then do lead to what we do see is a very tight labor market. But what I can let you know, and what I can let members of the public know, that we have a very strong Minister of Economy and Labor who knows, understands, and gets this. So we need to make sure that there is adequate labor supply inside of the country, and we'll make sure that there's adequate labor supply inside the country. But we cannot ensure there's adequate labor supply inside the country to the detriment of Bermudians. And so there is a balance that we must have. So the fact is that we do have a tight labor market, yes. And the reality is that we need to continue to make sure that we're doing more investments in housing and other services as the labor market will continue to be tight for the foreseeable future. There was a time before when people were saying we didn't have enough jobs. Now we have as many jobs and people are worried that we don't have enough labor. These are the things that governments must manage when we balance the economy, when we do economic management. But I think for the last 8 years, we've demonstrated that we can manage an economy, and we will make sure to make the necessary adjustments that the labor will be in place and the flexibility will be in place, because it is vital and important that next year that hotel opens and operates well. And so we will do that particular work. And I have no doubt the Minister of Economy and Labor is well aware of the future workforce planning needs for the country.
Got you. Just quickly, in terms of the corporate income tax, as I understand it, it can be quite volatile. You don't really know what you're dealing with. In terms of, I believe the term was a stability fund that the Tax Reform Commission proposed. We're going ahead with that?
Absolutely. And the pre-budget report spells out what the government's approach to that, but it's a great question and I'll answer that. So if you look back at the Tax Reform Commission report, the Tax Reform Commission recommended a waterfall of about 11 or 13 items, one or the other off the top of my head. But the top 2 items inside of their waterfall were a $200 to the debt sinking fund and $200 into $200 million to the debt sinking fund and $100 million into the stability fund on an annual basis. The government and the pre-budget report you will see is committing to accept that particular recommendation. The important point to note is that recommendation will come into place not in this next fiscal year, 2026-27. It will come into place in the following fiscal year, 2027-28. What is the reason for that? The reason is that next year, the government must repay $605 million worth of debt, and you can't necessarily put the money in the fund just to take it out of the fund to go ahead and to pay the debt. So the figures do reflect that that debt is going to be repaid. We're expecting to repay at least $500 million of that debt. Depending on where receipts go, it could be more, but the pre-budget report shows $500 million is going to be repaid. But it also shows in the future fiscal years, because we always set out a 3-year time frame that shows that we will be putting funds into the sinking fund and also into the stability fund, while also looking at implementing the other recommendations of the Tax Reform Commission.
Just quickly, when you speak of non-corporate income tax revenues, is payroll tax?
Those are all other revenues that are not corporate income tax. So the taxes that you're used to on any given day that we've had, since whether it's customs duty, payroll tax, stamp duty, vehicle licensing fees, all the other types of revenues that the government would collect.
And in terms of reducing the tax burden, is there a top tax cut that we can anticipate? I know it's going to be in the document that you just handed out, but.
Well, I think the most important thing on this is that, that we must seek feedback. We have done this before. I mean, from a pre-budget report, the pre-budget report has specific pointings to me, as I remember working with the former Minister of Finance, Paula Cox, as Junior Minister of Finance in 2011, issuing the first pre-budget report. So I recognize and understand the history. But at that point in time, we had committed to having a more participatory budget process. It is dangerous when budgets spring surprises onto businesses and people. And so we've gone through this process to make sure that people have an idea of what's coming. They may not know exactly what is happening, but we're putting this out to consultation. So the Tax Reform Commission, as I said, recommended 3 specific matters related to tax reductions. Those are an employer payroll tax reduction, bulk electricity generation incentives, and adjustments to the employee portion of payroll tax. Those are three things that we are considering, and we want to see what level of feedback will come. As is seen here in the pre-budget report, there's going to be about $45 million of tax cuts that are going to be included in the next budget. And the question is, what do those $45 million of tax reductions look like? Is it a combination? We know we're going to do some duty reductions, but is it a combination of payroll tax on the employer side, payroll tax on the employee side? Are there other things that could be reduced? And so those are the types of conversations we want to hear back from persons, from stakeholders. I met with my caucus last night, we'll be meeting with him in January, but the report is to stimulate conversation, discussion around what is most necessary. So we do have pre-consultation with all the business groups. They have written in, some of their ideas are in here as well. We'll have further meetings in January, but we want to hear from the public as well, because in past years, there have been some really good ideas that have come from the public consultation on the pre-budget report that have actually made it into the final budget.
Thanks. And last one for me, and I, of course, am somewhat fishing on this, but
Go ahead,
we
fish
have had
away.
we're looking at a rise in the standard premium rate to do with health insurance. Anything you can say on the potential magnitude of that? We've heard that it's looking at that coming, but we don't know how big it is.
So the cabinet will decide what the magnitude of that is, and we'll take a look at all the latest figures. What is important to note, Jonathan, and I don't want it to be forgotten, is that this follows what the government has done. So you heard me in my statement where I say that in past years, we've used better than expected economic performance to shield residents and businesses from costs of living increases. Due to the better than expected economic performance, we were able to use funds from the excess borrowing fund to freeze those rates for now 3 going on 4 years. That is significant. That is a very significant thing, and I don't want that to be forgotten, that we froze those rates. But what I said in the budget statement in 2025 in May, that it would not be possible to maintain that freeze in perpetuity, and there is going to need to be an increase. The $38 million of which the agreement costs has to be funded somehow. All of that is not going to go to insured persons. The government is going to certainly pay some, but that is going to be a conversation, discussion that is going to take place in the cabinet. But it is important to recognize that as we look to reform healthcare, the government cannot continue to underwrite that freeze, and there is going to have to be an increase in healthcare premiums. The standard premium rate, there's just going to have to be. Yes.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jasmine?
Good afternoon, Premier. Thanks for your statement today. Obviously, something that affects locals most directly, cost of food, goods, groceries, etc. I wondered with this budget surplus, is there any room for new investment in local farming or food production that could perhaps reduce our dependence on duty?
An excellent question, Jasmine, and the type of feedback that we wish to seek from members of the public. So when we look at the capital budget this year, the capital budget is expected to go up to $170 million. Now, in contrast, it's important to recognize that 3 years ago, our capital budgets were at 80, and that was thought to be a lot. There's significantly more space for capital money, for capital investment, for those type of things to go to the community. And certainly, I know the Ministry of Economy and Labor, along with the Ministry of Public Works and Environment, are finalizing the integrated agricultural strategy. But if there is more support that we can provide, I know there is support that we've already provided to farmers through the BBC and continuing to work there. So the answer to the question is yes. But at the same time, we also want to reduce taxes where we can, which can have certain benefits as well. I think when we talk about, matters for the community, there are also considerations around near-term funding for smaller items. So for instance, when we're talking about smaller businesses, we have these conversations where people are saying, okay, we've got feral chickens running around, why don't we have a chicken farm and different things like that. All those things, we're going to have the capacity to make sure that we set up well-managed funds to do that. So those aren't things that will be in, broader, larger issues of sovereign wealth funds, but there's also a discussion whether or not we should set up smaller entrepreneurship funds and put things towards that can support those type of efforts. So the answer to the question is yes. Those are all things that can be considered, and that is what the objective of the pre-budget report is to do. It is to solicit feedback from members of the public, from community organizations, from business stakeholders around the choices that we face as we go towards the next budget.
People that may be hearing this, economy's doing great. The fiscal responsibility panel said the economy's stronger than it's ever been in the last 2 decades. These are very powerful statements, but I wondered, how can you bridge the gap between those who are not seeing the increase in their wages, are not seeing grocery prices go down as much as they need? Is this going to be more of a long-term, impact before people can actually feel the effects of the economy?
So I would say that the fiscal responsibility panel certainly said that the government's fiscal position is in a better space than it had been. I mean, the economy is a mixed bag. We have seen significant economic growth. We have seen continued job growth. We have seen wages that are going up, but also that is being coupled by, price increases in some places as well. I think that it is important to note and to recognize that we have seen reductions in a number of places. Belco bills are going down again next year, and that's on top of the tax reductions of which we've put in place. The Minister of Home Affairs has launched the Affordable Review Basket to ensure that people can get the 20% reduction on those essential baskets and goods. So I think it would not be accurate to say that costs are not coming down in certain ways. The government is working to continue to do that. But at the same point in time, our job is to make sure we invest to have there to be even a better economic space in the country. That means we have to put more money into affordable housing. The significant amounts of money of which we're going to put into affordable housing will increase next year so we can even deliver more particular items, and also making sure that we make healthcare more affordable by delivering on those pledges. So if we look at persons who may be challenged, persons who may be on lower incomes, and you look at the recommendations which were set out by the Tax Reform Commission, such as low income healthcare subsidies and others, to make sure that persons who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, who are challenged, will have more support. And so this is a bipartisan committee, remember, that was made up of, OBA members, PLP members, business, local business, international business, community organizations, labor unions, who've come up with these particular recommendations. And so we are proud of the work that the Tax Reform Commission has done, and we're looking seriously at those recommendations. And those are some of the things that can address those challenges, because it is important to use the money that you have in order to affect the most people in the places where it can have the best effect on their lives.
Just speaking of electricity, the Islands Utility recently announced that they're offering, voluntary shedding of jobs, those opting for retirement. We also have some political instability in Venezuela, which I believe is where we source our fuel. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if that is somewhat of a contradiction towards what we see in Belco reducing bills for us. Is that really going to happen?
Well, I can't say that we source our oil from Venezuela. I would doubt we do, but I don't know. I can assure you, I'm not an oil supply expert. What I can say is that, remember, the electricity sector in this country is regulated, and we've seen a reduction in the standard rate of Belco bills that will come into place in January. But we've also seen a reduction due to the fact that we have reduced by 80% the taxes that used to be on electricity bills. That has gone down. And at the same point in time, we've seen a decline in the fuel adjustment rate because the global price of fuel has gone down. So there is easing pressures there. So we have to recognize there are spaces where there's easing pressures. But at the same time, we've seen a slowdown in food inflation, but we're still suffering from the high prices that came into place during the significant spike that we saw in 2020, 2023. But these are not just isolated to Bermuda. These are global phenomenon. Anyone who goes on, who watches international news or TV, will see the challenge of the United States, see the challenge of the United Kingdom, see the challenge of Canada. The difference is that this government has the capacity to respond. The U.S. is running massive budget deficits. Canada is in budget deficits. The UK is having a challenge making sure that they can get their things correct. From our perspective, we have the capacity to continue to reduce taxes, make investments, and support persons. And that is what this government will do. But it didn't get there overnight. It took us a while to get here, and we have to be equally as cautious as we go forward to make sure that we do not, I guess I would say, upset the balance, continue to be patient while implementing relief in a gradual and phased fashion rather than all in one fashion, because we need to make sure that we manage our economy well while still reducing a very large mountain of debt.
The Islands Utility offering voluntary retirement, does that ever, do you see that at all as concerning?
I don't necessarily view it as concerning. I don't think that's the correct thing. I think that companies must follow the laws. And so if there's voluntary retirement and people are voluntarily taking the package because they may want to do something else, then that's fine. We see restructuring that's taking place all throughout certain businesses as well. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that the government was offering voluntary retirement. We're not doing that now as well. But the reality is that there are plenty of jobs inside this economy. Plenty of jobs inside this economy. Our economy is very tight. And so for skilled workers who may elect to take a voluntary retirement package, they may have the opportunity to do something else. They may say, you know what, I'm done. I have enough of my pension. I've done my savings and all the rest, and I'm good to go. So those are options that people can take themselves. What is the most important thing to do is that we regulate the electricity sector well, and we also regulate other sectors well. One of the things when we talk about cost of living, it's something that I missed inside of my speech, but something that's also been achieved for the Minister of Home Affairs. The conversation discussed about lower price mobile phone bills or mobile phone plans that are now available. This was not the case last year. When you would go to certain companies, the lowest phone bill you can get would be $80 or $90. Now they're offering cell phone plans at $50, which is in response to the work of which the government has done in pushing and pressuring. So that is an important thing to recognize and to realize as well.
Just lastly, the fiscal responsibility panel, obviously I've just received it. I
That's
don't know
fine.
what's in it. But is there anything in there in terms of the recommendations that you feel might be more challenging than others?
I think so. I certainly think so. I think that the fiscal responsibility panel has a certain view. And I think that some of the comments of which they made can be well taken. I think that I think that their view that corporate income tax revenues themselves should be just kept separate does not accord with the policy view of the government of Bermuda. Because at the beginning of this, we said that it is our view that revenues from corporate income tax should be used to reduce or lower other taxes which increase the cost of living in Bermuda. The Fiscal Responsibility Panel is far more cautious to say that these revenues should be segregated. We don't believe so, and that the regular budget, the regular taxes that we continue to collect, the ones that we've always had, payroll tax and all the rest, should largely fund current operations. So we've tried to come to a place inside the middle, but that's really, that's the conversation discussion. I, as Minister of Finance, do not believe that if we are getting a significant additional revenue stream, that we should not try to see if we can reduce taxes that increase the cost of living and the cost of doing business. And so we expect to implement the Tax Reform Commission's recommendations while also looking at future reform of the tax system. And I think that the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, if I can give them credit, has always said that Bermuda's tax reform has to be along the lines of which the Tax Reform Commission has said, looking at a change in the system of taxation towards a broader base income tax. Now, those were words that would never be uttered by politicians in Bermuda before. But now they're coming from the bipartisan Tax Reform Commission. They're coming from the Fiscal Responsibility Panel. And if we're looking at long-term fairness, and if we're really talking about how do we boost paychecks for persons and to reduce taxes more broadly inside the economy and make our economy work better, that is the direction to travel. The Tax Reform Commission recognized that, the Fiscal Responsibility Panel recognized that, and this government recognizes that, and it has to be a path to getting there.
One follow-up, did they cite any risks associated with not segregating CIT funds?
Absolutely. I mean, those risks are that these things are volatile, but I think that we're being prudent. We're not trying to say, okay, we're going to get, all this money in this year and we're going to spend it all. No. Next year, we're saying that we're expecting a significant amount of money to come in, and we're going to use that money to pay off debt. And the money that we use to pay off debt will mean there'll be more revenue in future years. So there's always a balance. But remember, Tax Reform Commission makes recommendations. The government takes on some of those recommendations and may not take them all on. I think we've basically accepted all the tax reform recommendations in full because they're very good, well thought out. On the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, they have a view, the government may have a different view, and we may end up somewhere in the middle. But I think that it is important that all the information is out there in the public domain so people can go ahead and read and have an assessment and look at an independent assessment of what the government has done insofar as managing the country's finances.
All right, thank you, members of the media, for your participation and questions this morning to the Premier. Do you have any final words for members of the viewing audience this time?
The only words I'll say is go to forum.gov.bm to read the pre-budget reports. Also, the fiscal responsibility panel report will also be able to be found online. Participate in the conversation discussion. And finally, for those of you who celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas to you and your families. Happy holidays and season's greetings. Enjoy and be safe. Thank you.